today, the student loan forgiveness program, which was a major promise that President Biden made, and that, again, even when he announced this one, it wasn't really good enough for the left, which was interesting. There's another religious victory, liberty victory today as well. But I do want to go to the student loan program because that is one that gets to the heart, Dad, of just all of these issues, and it was the big one about presidential power in this term.
And we are joined by our Senior Counsel for Global Affairs, Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State and former Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, who also last year, Mike, you wrote in August, is kind of predicting an article for the website for the ACLJ said Biden's student debt cancellation is misguided and illegal, and 6 justices of the Supreme Court of the United States said Mike Pompeo was right.
Oh, goodness. Well, it's a really good outcome for America. I wish it had been 9 justices. I wish everyone could see the simplicity of the fact that presidents can't use language and statutes in ways that are just made up. And, President Biden himself knew that this was made up. And this has a good policy outcome. That is, people who take on obligations and responsibilities, in this case, student loans, will have the responsibility to repay them. That's as a policy matter, a very good thing. But this case and the 3 others that Jordan referenced a few minutes ago, they each get back to individual responsibility, accountability, and autonomy. And this is certainly that too. This will reduce presidential powers to inflict harm on the American people and restore the capacity of the Congress to actually get it right and to write laws that make sense. I've now read the majority opinion, and it was remarkable in the specific with respect to student loans, and really powerful about the shape of our constitutional republic.
So ironic about this was that you have the student, the way they had the program set up, you literally could have the individual, the man or woman that, let's say, went to trade school or community college, became a plumber, and doesn't have student debt. Their taxpayer dollars are going to use, to offset the student that got an MBA at a major university. And it's the plumber's taxpayer dollars being used to offset that individual's tuition. I mean, when you think about it, it was totally absurd.
It's crazy. I long before we knew each other, I ran a machine shop in Wichita, Kansas. These were some of the hardest working men and women, engineers, technicians, creative talent, some of whom had formal educations, but many of them did not. These folks were going to be made to pay for others who just were completely irresponsible and took out loans to do things that didn't have a return on their lives or their capabilities, their skill sets, as we begin to think about the 21st century workforce. And to force others to pay for your education is kind of the socialist model, the Democrat progressive model that we've seen for a long time, Jay. We know this, and this is one less instance when they've been able to take from someone who was hardworking, diligent, and responsible, and give to someone who was far less so on each of those 3 counts.
It's interesting, Secretary Pompeo, also, when you go broader, we saw what happened on student loans, but hopefully what we're hoping to see is that this decision puts more of a check on the administrator's attempt to basically legislate outside of the normal legislative process, so that they now have this clear Supreme Court decision that says, you know what, we're not going to accept these moves when you don't have the authority to act. There's not been legislative authority granted to you, and you don't have the authority in your office to do it. So if you want to do these things, go through the regular process, but you can't do it by executive fiat.
I think that's definitely true. That's the theme of the majority opinion, is process, return to the constitutional norms, not just executives willy-nilly running off and doing things that are inconsistent with the law. That is absolutely true. You saw that in the affirmative action case as well, where now they're simply returning to historical constitutional norms that matter a heck of a lot. Jordan, it's funny. The first response from the Biden administration is to say, how can we slip the noose again? How can we give them 3-month deferrals and maybe more? And right in the end, this is a tell. And for people who are thinking about their lives and who they're going to vote for, you have a party that is clearly determined to give handouts to people who didn't earn them and take money away from people who, in fact, did earn it. And that's unfortunate. I hope that the courts will immediately slap down any Biden administration to get around this Supreme Court decision today and make clear that the expectation is exactly what you described. If you want to change the law, if you have an idea and you think it makes sense, present it to the Senate, present it to the House. When they pass it, a president can sign it. And until then, he must follow the law.
It's interesting because you have served both as a member of Congress, you have served running two large agencies, essentially the CIA as well as the State Department. It was interesting to me on page 24 of the opinion. The Chief Justice writes that he said, experience shows that major questions have arisen from all corners. This is the quote of the administrative state. An administrative action resulting in the conferral of benefits is no exception to the rule. So when we talk about an administrative state, you've run these large agency. Explain to the folks what this is, because there is like an entire, you have Congress passing laws, and then you've got this administrative bureaucracy that puts out rules and regulations that are 50 times the size of the actual law.
Oh my goodness! Pick up Department of Labor regulation. Pick up EPA regulation, to the thousands of pages and to the layperson completely incomprehensible. All around a statute that might run 4, 5, 6, 10 pages. This administrative state, I saw it firsthand, most especially at the State Department, Jay. They are absolutely willing to take a law and say, well, that's interesting, and I'm glad you suggested that, but here's my vision for how America ought to move forward. It is unchecked. It is unconstitutional. And most importantly, it is unresponsive to the democratic process. And so to see a court now come back to this idea of major questions and say, nope, when you're going to make big changes, you have to have explicit statutory authority. The law has to tell you you can do it, is heartwarming for those of us who believe in constitutional principles. This isn't even about what Congress might pass. It's that, and I saw this when I was a member of Congress, much easier to be lazy and not take responsibility and pass it off to the administrative state. That's a bad way to run a nation.
Joe Biden knew he couldn't do this. He said it on the record a couple of times on his own without legislation. Nancy Pelosi backed him up when she was speaker and said, can't do this. Don't think that President Biden can just do this. We'd all love it if he could, but he can't. It's going to take legislation. It's going to take the legislative battle. So she was on the record that way too. And the Supreme Court noted that they had already acknowledged that they didn't believe that they had this power. But now we kind of look at this, and they're, like you mentioned, they're already trying to look at workarounds because they want to make good on this campaign promise. And the left didn't think this was even big enough. So it's interesting. They thought that this was just a pretty weak to begin with anyways, the left of the party. But I still think with this administration, we got to follow them really closely because I think they're going to have something in their back pocket. Well, we might not be able to do it in full, but maybe we'll try something else.
Jordan, I think they fully anticipated the Supreme Court would get it right as they did today. And I have no doubt that they have already tried to figure out a way to avoid the conclusion that the Supreme Court handed them today. So I completely agree. It reminds me too, Jordan, why elections matter so much, why the work of places like the ACLJ matters so much. These ideas of merit, which is at the heart of the affirmative action case yesterday, merit is at the heart of this policy as well. When we elect leaders who understand that individual liberty and autonomy matter, we'll get good outcomes for broad swaths of the American people. And efforts like the Biden administration is surely intent upon making in the weeks and months ahead will be viewed as fundamentally indecent and not the right direction for our country. Elections, in the end, elections drive our policies. And this decision today makes sure that that is so, and that unelected bureaucrats sitting in the administrative state don't have the chance to do that.
We only have a minute left here, but we filed a brief in this case, as you know, Mr. Secretary, on this whole idea of administrative state running out of control and checking executive power. And just for a moment here, let our folks know why that is important, an issue like this, which seems very technical, why we need to be able to engage that.
Look, I saw this when I was a Secretary of State. The work that the ACLJ did impacted how policymakers on Capitol Hill and in the White House think about certain sets of policies. A brief to the Supreme Court like this also provides intellectual ammunition for those justices as well. I've seen the ACLJ's brief, and I've now seen the court's decision. It wouldn't surprise me, but there is a nexus between the two. The work that you do, Jay, and your team, Jordan, do is really, really important. It impacts the way each of us lives our lives and our capacity to take care of our families and all the things that folks that watch your show care so much about.
Mr. Secretary, thanks for being with us. We appreciate your insight and glad you're part of our team here.